Hello, and welcome to HHH, the podcast where we talk about those horrible humans in history. I am your host, Angela Pearson, and I am so glad you guys are joining me today. It is our 20th episode. I know, 20 episodes, crazy, right? So thank you for coming along for this ride with me. It's been really fun. Like I said, I'm only doing this for like a hobby, so I hope you guys are enjoying it as much as I am, because it's been so fun to research all of these people and talk about them. So make sure you're liking, subscribing, and sharing this with anyone else that you think would enjoy this kind of content. It's been really fun to do, and I'm going to keep doing it. Don't worry. This is not me saying we're giving up or anything. I'm just saying it's our 20th episode, and I'm so excited to continue doing this with you guys. So today, for our 20th episode, we are going to be talking about someone that I would consider one of the most evil women to have ever lived. She is kind of the worst, and I know you've been thinking, you're 20 episodes in, how have you not talked about a Nazi yet? Because we all know Nazis are the freaking worst, right? And if you're a Holocaust denier, you can just leave, because it happened and it was horrible. It was horrific. And this woman played a role in that horror. In fact, she contributed to so many people suffering and dying that she had a nickname as I can't say the word because I don't swear, the Witch with a B of Buchenwald. She helped kill people in the Buchenwald concentration camp. And I'm going to say that she even reminds me of our dear friend Ed Gein. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, first of all, you should, for sure. But that's kind of the direction we're going. If you've heard that episode, yeah. So I'll forewarn you that this period of history, like Nazi Germany and the concentration camps, was something that I actually studied very thoroughly in my master's program. So I might get a little passionate and might get a little carried away with some of the facts. I will try and keep it under control for you, but this part of history fascinates me, and this woman is the worst. So let's get into the story about Ilse Koch. Ilse Koch. She was actually born Margaret Ilse Kohler on September 22nd, 1906 in Dresden, Germany. And she actually came from very humble beginnings. Her father was a laborer and her mother was just a housewife. I tried to find more details about her parents, like names and those kinds of things, but that was hard information to come by. So her upbringing is a little faded into history, but she was known as a very friendly, happy girl and was actually very popular in school. And like many other German girls at the time, this was a big focus for German women at this time. She was taught how to be the perfect housewife. She would cook, clean, and learn how to take care of children because that was what was expected of German women. When she was 15 years old, she left school and actually started working at a cigarette factory full time. So while she was working, she started taking classes at a local college for accounting and eventually earned her bookkeeping position. Because Ilse was actually part of the lower class, the promises that the Nazi Party started preaching were very appealing to her. So for some background, I'm sure some of you know about this, but after World War I, Germany had sunk into a very deep depression. No matter how much money Germany was able to collect and produce, they owed so much money to the winners of the First World War, who had pinned all the blame on Germany, by the way, and expected them to actually foot the bill for rebuilding their own countries, let alone Germany's country. And it was so bad that the people of Germany were starving because they just could not get on top of this debt. And the poor people were desperate for things to change. They were so angry with their government for losing the war. They thought they could have won the war, which at this time was called the Great War because there hadn't been a World War II. So this was known as the Great War at the time. And they were convinced that they should have won because they were only 43 miles from Paris. They were so close to taking over Paris, but the government actually surrendered before the people believed they should have surrendered. At least, that's what the people believed. So they were super embarrassed at their loss and having to rebuild their country like everyone else, and had no means to do so because they were giving all of their money away to the other countries so they could rebuild. So all excess supplies and money were going outside of their country, and it devastated the economy of Germany. With that being said, many people were desperate for something new, a new government, and the Nazi Party was making some really big promises. And all those promises were coming at the exact right time. So it convinced a lot of people that fascism would solve all their problems, would bring them back to prosperity and into power. So a lot of people became very convinced that the Nazi Party was a solution. They also started believing that the Aryan race was the more superior race. I don't know why. Don't ask me why. They were just delusional. Many Germans blamed the failure of the Great War on the Jews and believed that anyone not of the Aryan blood was actually less than human. So they couldn't possibly be the ones that caused the failure of the Great War. It had to be someone else conspiring against them, and they pinned it on the Jews. So, with all of that background, Ilse, her beliefs fell right in line with the Nazi Party. So she would be one of the first people to actually join the Nazi Party from its very early existence because she believed everything that they were saying. So while she attended all the rallies and meetings of the Nazi Party, Ilse would actually meet a like-minded gentleman named Karl Koch. The two of them would eventually marry in 1936 and start a family of their own. Karl was 9 years older than Ilse and actually already had a divorce from his first wife, who did not like the Nazi beliefs. So you girlfriend, way to stand your ground, because if you would have stayed with this man, your life would have taken a very different turn. So he actually had a criminal history as a thief and would actually become an informant for the police because of his record of stealing and those kinds of things. He would become an informant for the police. And you would think this would kind of be a red flag for Ilse, but she was pretty attracted to this bad boy past and didn't seem to have any qualms with him being married or being a thief or a criminal, and she was totally fine marrying him. So I feel like this should have been a red flag about her, not necessarily about him, but about her, that she really liked this bad boy past and was okay marrying him. So there's your first red flag that this lady might be a little off. So once Hitler actually took power, the couple was given rewards for being some of their first members of the Nazi Party. So they actually got very high-ranking positions. Karl, her husband, was given a position as a high-ranking SS officer. And if you don't know what the SS are, I don't have time to get into it, but they are horrifying and scary, like terrifying. So he became a high-ranking SS officer. So he went from being a petty criminal, remember, he was a criminal, to someone with tons and tons of power. Sounds like a really good mix to me, right? Like, oh my, you can tell this is going to end real well. So neither of the two had actually grown up with any sort of wealth or power, and they were both suddenly handed a ton of wealth and a ton of power. So like I said, this won't end well. And they totally took advantage of both of those things. So first, Karl was made a warden of a prison in Berlin, where he would stuff prisoners into dog houses and force them to eat out of dog bowls. He required them to kneel and bark when he was around. If they refused, they were beaten. If a prisoner did something wrong, they got hot tar poured all over their backside. So this is just him being over an actual prison, not a concentration camp, just a prison. And you can tell that this guy was super approachable, you know, someone you for sure would want to put in charge of other vulnerable people that he believes aren't actual people. Yeah, that sounds like a really great idea. The Nazis actually saw his ruthlessness and wanted to really tap into it. And that's why they decided he would be more useful running a concentration camp filled with Third Reich's enemies, you know, like Jews and political enemies. So they decided that they would put him in charge of a concentration camp. Now, most women would be super disturbed by their husband having such a brutal reputation and the atrocities that he was committing against these prisoners, but not Ilse. No. She loved that about her husband. She loved that he had a reputation like that and actually wanted in on the action. She wanted to join him in the torturing of these prisoners. So when she found out that they would be working at a concentration camp, she was almost giddy with excitement. She went to get some practice in at a prison camp called, oh man, it's a German word. This is going to be bad. Sachsenhausen. I think I didn't butcher that. I think I did well. Anyways, she actually went to the prison to practice her, tactics, I guess, with these prisoners before they went off to the concentration camp. So this concentration camp that they were assigned to was brand new. It was something that was just being built. So they actually got to help with the building of the concentration camp. And they put a sign on the gate of the camp that said, Jedem das Siene. Sien? I think. Or in English, it says, to each his own. Basically, that was a message to every prisoner coming into the camp that said, it basically meant everyone gets what's coming to them, or you Jews are getting what you deserve because you're coming into this camp. You're getting what you deserve. Because they saw the people arriving at the concentration camp as less than human. So it was just kind of like a middle finger to the prisoners as they were coming in. Like, you're getting what's coming to you. Like, you deserve it. Now, the concentration camp that Ilse and her husband was over was called Buchenwald. And it was one of the largest Nazi concentration camps with over 50,000 people that would eventually die in this camp. Now, it didn't have gas chambers like a lot of the other concentration camps, but that didn't make it any less terrible. They did have the incinerators that they would destroy the bodies and those kinds of things, but this was mostly a slave labor camp to make things that the Third Reich really needed. So if you were sent to Buchenwald, your life expectancy was longer than those who were sent to other camps because they actually needed your labor. So you could live for a few years in Buchenwald versus places like Auschwitz, where your life expectancy was more like 3 to 4 months. So you got sent to Buchenwald, it was almost, I was going to say almost better, because you lived longer. Your potential to live longer was better. But what kind of life is that? Like slave labor. And wait till I get into the rest of this. It's not a life you would want to extend, basically. So Ilse demanded that her family live in a mansion that was built on the same property as the concentration camp. So they actually lived on the same property as the concentration camp, where most of the time they lived off-site. It's because Ilse really wanted to be involved. But the rules in Nazi Germany for the sexes were very stringent and very specific. The perfect German woman was supposed to be happy to do all of the housework, stay crazy loyal to her husband, do whatever he wanted, and stay strong in the face of adversity. So she was supposed to be the one running the household. As a wife of an SS officer, Ilse wasn't expected to do a lot of the common work like cooking, cleaning, and stuff that normal German women would do. But she was expected to be a good example as a high-ranking woman in the Nazi party. Like, show other women, this is how a woman should behave. This is how you should treat your husband and those kinds of things. Well, Ilse took her high rank to a whole new level that most women didn't go to. She never did any of the housework, ever. And she realized that she could make the prisoners be her personal slaves. So she basically had her own army of slaves and demanded that they take care of everything in the house. She demanded that everyone call her Gina Dugan, I think is how you say it, Gina Dugan Frau, which was an old term that was actually used for women in nobility. So someone thought very highly of herself. And don't you worry, we'll get more into that high self-esteem that she has. Oh boy. So because she had no work to do, she had no household chores, she wasn't fulfilling her role as a German woman, she was often very bored and had very little to do. So she actually made the prisoners build her a big sports arena where she could practice her hobby of horseback riding. It cost over 200,000 Reichsmarks at the time to build, which in today's money would be well over $1 million to build this. And she made her prisoners build this. And secret, which is kind of a spoiler, she used the money that was being sent for the concentration camp to build this. That's important. It will come back to haunt her. You shall find out later. But horseback riding ended up not being enough to keep her entertained. She was still getting super bored and decided she wanted to, have some influence over at the camp. So there was a rule in the camp that if you so much as looked at the commander's wife, you would be shot on the spot. So, of course, to entertain herself, Ilse started dressing provocatively is a way to say it. She would show off her cleavage and wear tight clothes on a daily basis to try and attract attention so people would get shot. So she was purposely trying to draw attention to herself so people would get killed. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. I haven't heard about a lot of women getting involved at the concentration camps. And that is correct, because most wives didn't get involved at the camps. They would stay home that was far away from the camp and run their home like everything was normal. They had an idea of what their husbands were doing, but they weren't super involved. They were just kind of a support for their husband. They didn't know what the job was. He went off to work. She ran the home. He came home. They didn't talk about it. Not Ilse. No, she demanded to be involved with the camp. She actually really loved the fact that people were slowly starving and dying all around her. She loved it. She thought it was super entertaining to watch these people wither away and die. And if you haven't noticed this yet, Ilse was slightly cocky, if that is the right way to say it, and really thought she was a hottie McHotface. Like, literally, like, narcissist. Like, I'll post some pictures on the Horrible Humans in History Instagram page so you can decide for yourself if she was a hottie McHotface. I personally don't see where the arrogance is coming from. I'm not seeing it. I think it was misplaced a little bit. But, maybe her fiery red hair was more impressive in person. I don't know. But she believed she was hot stuff. Like, she thought she was the prettiest woman and sexiest woman ever. But the reason why I bring this up is because there are stories that when her husband was away, she would demand that the officers bring groups of soldiers and line them up in front of her. Once they were all lined up, she demanded that they all strip until they were fully naked, and she would go through and inspect them or just sit back and enjoy the view. Ew. Ew. Another story is that while her husband was away, she would also strip down to nothing but her lingerie and lay out in the yard in full view of the imprisoned men, knowing that these men have been deprived of satisfying certain needs, and if any of them even glanced in her direction or became uncontrollably aroused, that man would immediately be taken by the guards and shot in the head. So she was purposely trying to provoke these men to feel things that they couldn't control so they could get killed. Like, walking around in skimpy underwear to get these men turned on. Like, ugh. Ew. Like I said, she's not that hot. But if you're a prisoner that hasn't been able to, that kind of stuff, I mean, it would work. Now she also demanded this part. Ugh, she's just disgusting. She demanded that she have teenage boys working in her home. And other servants said that she required these boys very frequently to bring her breakfast in bed. And obviously there had to be some horrible twist where she would be wearing either nothing or some kind of skimpy nightgown. And the same rules applied to these teenage boys as they did to the men out in the yard. Like, if they even dared look in her direction, that was enough to get them killed. And remember, these are teenage boys. It's pretty likely they couldn't help but get aroused when they saw a woman, because it probably was the first time they had ever seen a woman in that situation, And they're already going through a lot as teenage boys going through puberty. Like, even if they hated her guts, their bodies would have just reacted. And she knew this. There was a boy named Eric Hirsch. He was about 15 years old and was a servant for Ilse. And he said that the Koch residence was on the edge of the camp, and he was able to actually look out the window and see free people walking beyond the fence, like just walking down the street, minding their own business. And that world didn't seem real to him because he was having to live this nightmare. It was like those people were living in some kind of fantasy world. And he always questioned why he couldn't be the lucky one and be out in that world. And Ilse, out of the kindness of her heart, also allowed Eric to eat 2 boiled potatoes every Sunday. She's just got a giving heart, guys. What can I say? Jeez. And he would bring those boiled potatoes back to the prisoner's barracks where he was living. And he actually didn't like the skin of the potato, so he would throw it on the ground. And other prisoners would race and fight to get the potato peels because they were so desperate for food. Like I said, they were starving. They did not feed them enough, and they worked them literally to death because they didn't have enough food to survive. So this woman was basically a sexual sadist who got turned on by the idea of inflicting pain on other people. Seriously. Why is it all the women? This is episode 20, and the only people that this has been the case for has been the women. Why? Why? I gotta know. Why? It's so insane to me. But she was a total narcissist. And I mean, I'm talking about clinical sense, not just like, not the, oh, he's such a narcissist because he just loves himself. No. I'm talking about the clinical narcissist who literally has no feelings for other people and just believes that they are the ultimate human being. And I'm pretty sure she's also a psychopath because she had no feelings for these other humans, like no emotional connection to be like, oh, suffering of humans. No, she didn't have that. So I'm pretty sure she was also a psychopath. Anyways, back to the story. According to some of the prisoners who worked in the house, she was also having many affairs. So she had one with Dr. Waldmar, one of the quote-unquote doctors of the camp, and a deputy commander, Herman Florstend. I can't say their names, they're German. And when her husband was gone, she often spent the night at Dr. Hoven's home. So it's also thought she was having an affair with him. Now, Dr. Hoven, we haven't gotten into this yet, but we will. He helped conduct human experiments. So we're going to get into that in just a hot second. But she was having an affair with multiple men. And not only that, but it's believed that her and her husband would actually throw massive orgies at their house for all the SS officers. So these two were gross. They were just gross when it comes to that area of their lives. Sexual sadists, that's all I'll say. Anyways, we are aware that most of the concentration camps actually had some form of human experimentation happening. Buchenwald concentration camp that Ilse helped run was no exception. Not at all. Doctors at the camp were actually purposely poisoning people with different deadly chemicals to see, if they could somehow create an antidote. Obviously, why not kill a bunch of people on experimenting to try and find an antidote? Makes total sense? ? They also injected homosexuals with random concoctions that were supposed to quote-unquote cure them. It obviously didn't work and ended up killing them, and that was the typical outcome of these special drugs. And eventually, Ilse got bored of sexually tempting all the men and having them shot in the head, so she decided she wanted to watch these experiments take place. And this was going to be her new hobby, is just enjoying the human experimentation. So one day, when she was riding on her horse through camp, which was what she loved to do, she noticed, and while she was riding through camp, she loved to beat people with her horsewhip, which she would add razor blades to, by the way. She would just pick random people out of the crowd and just start beating them with her horsewhip as she was riding past. Yep, sounds like a peach of a woman. Anyways, she noticed on one of these rides that a lot of prisoners had a lot of different interesting tattoos that she liked. And she approached one of the doctors, Dr. Eric Wagner, with an experiment idea. She thought that they should see if tattoos correlated in any way with criminal behavior. Because, yeah, why not? Ugh. I seriously, the whole time I was reading this story, I was just like, groaning and rolling my eyes the whole time because it's just so disturbing. Anyways, the doctor should have actually told her no because it was against protocol for him to do that because he needed approval from higher up in the Nazi party to do any kind of experiment, but he didn't say no. He obviously said yes. So Ilse would go through the crowd and she would stop men that she noticed would have tattoos. She would force them to all strip down and she would examine their tattoos, find the one that she liked the most, and have them killed so she could keep their skin with the tattoo on it. Ugh. That just gives me the heebie-jeebies. See what I told you? Ed Gein. Anyways, so their skin was often used to cover lampshades, knife sheaths, books, and she liked to call these her trophies. Her trophies. Now, if you think that's disturbing, it gets worse because as she's creating these things, it gave her a great idea of how to make a unique Christmas gift for her friends and family. So she ordered a group of Jewish prisoners to make huge quantities of these quote-unquote gifts made from human leather. Are you grossed out yet? Like, I am. So disgusting. And during the holly jolly holiday season, she would send these gifts to SS officers who were in charge of other concentration camps. And you would think that the reaction of receiving a gift in human leather would be like super disturbing and upsetting for people. No, they loved it. They thought it was great. That's the kind of people we're dealing with. Yeah, they're awful. And it's rumored that she actually used other body parts around her home, like using thumbs as light switches. We don't have any for sure proof on that, but there's rumors that happened. And it's even said that she had a handbag that was made out of human skin that she was so proud of and would show off to all the other SS officers and their wives. Like, just be like, yeah, it's Prada, basically, is how she felt about it. Like, she was so proud of this nasty, nasty purse of people that she murdered for their tattoos. Yeah, great. So, in addition to her riding through camp to find, her future Christmas presents and home decor, so disturbing, she also was known, like I said, to beat random prisoners with her whip. She loved seeing the children suffer and die. Like, she was known to cheer and laugh loudly when she saw children going into the execution chambers. She thought it was just so hilarious that these children were being killed. Like, I'm telling you, she is a freaking sadist. She is horrible. She also really hated pregnant women, despite being a mother of 3 herself. Remember, this woman who's parading around in lingerie trying to get people killed and like making human trinkets, she had 3 kids. 3 kids. So, how? Anyways, she would beat pregnant woman because she did not like them, and she would use her razor blade whip to beat these pregnant women. And she would even force male prisoners to rape female prisoners in front of her because it gave her the jollies. I just ew, she is seriously the worst. Now, if a prisoner tried to escape any of the concentration camps, they would be shot. Well, this happened in the Buchenwald concentration camp, but that's not the entire story of this instance where these prisoners tried to escape. What actually happened was Ilse ordered some of the prisoners and some of the guards to go fetch water from a well that was nearby the camp. And then she claimed they'd been trying to escape and had them shot. This woman is a peach, I tell you what. And at some point, Ilse's husband, Ilse Koch, contracted syphilis. Now, this is going to be the beginning of their downfall. He ordered the execution of the orderly who gave him his diagnosis, as well as the other 2 men who actually helped treat him. He was trying to cover up the fact that he was a cheater, his wife was a cheater, they were doing all of these horrible things. It was super embarrassing and would have destroyed them socially. I mean, not murdering a bunch of people and decorating your house with their skin, that didn't do it. No. Blech. But having affairs, that would do it. The Nazis' priorities, guys, they were spot on. Jeez Louise. But, interesting fact, one of the people that had gone to fetch the water and was claimed to be trying to escape was actually an SS officer who was one of the men who had tried to help treat Ilse's husband for his syphilis. And the reason why they shot him was to cover up. They didn't want anyone else knowing that this was happening. And some people thought that they had an open relationship in their marriage, but I doubt it, since they were trying to really cover up the fact that there was infidelity going on. But I mean, they were having orgies and stuff, so I guess we'll never really know. So there's that. But in 1942, Ilse and her husband were actually taken to court for misappropriating the funds of the Buchenwald camp and for their over-the-top methods of torturing and for killing 3 prisoners that the Nazis deemed unauthorized, whatever that means. So they're killing thousands of people, but these 3 specific people, it wasn't authorized, so now they're in trouble. Now, I just mentioned that Karl had the orderly and 2 other men killed. These were the deaths that actually triggered the investigation into what was happening at Buchenwald. Not the deaths of the other prisoners. No. Not the people being killed for their tattoos. No. Just to be very clear, the only reason why this investigation was opened because of deaths at the camp was because they were SS officers and orderlies at the hospital, and that sent up a red flag saying, oh, these specific people shouldn't have died. Everyone else is fine, they can be killed, but these 3 specific people should not have been killed. But what's not shocking is that the misappropriating of the funds was the bigger crime in the minds of the Nazis. I mean, why would killing people be a big crime? But misappropriating funds, stealing from the Nazis, stealing from the SS, that was a big deal. And it's actually kind of surprising how long it took the Nazis to notice that they were using camp funds for their horse stadium and Ilse's lavish lifestyle. It's kind of shocking because they were pretty on top of things as far as finances. So they also charged Ilse's husband with embezzlement because he actually kept a lot of items from the prisoners himself because he liked them and could make money off of them. But that was a big no-no. He was actually supposed to send all of those things that he collected to the SS to benefit the SS. Now remember, this man was a thief. And they put him in charge of all of this. And they're surprised that he stole from them. These people are dummies. Anyways, so many of the human experiments that were conducted at Buchenwald's camp were actually at the whims of the coaches as well. They were not done because the Nazi Party wanted it done. It was literally like, I wonder, let's try this thing on people and see how well that goes. That was also a no-no. That was not allowed. the experiments that were conducted should have come down from much higher up in the Nazi Party. It was not something that they were supposed to do on a whim and be like, no, I wonder how this is going to work on a human body. No. They were not allowed to do that. So they were also in trouble for that. So they have 3 charges against them. Disobeying orders by doing all these random experiments that they shouldn't have done. They were keeping things from the SS that they should have been sending to the SS. Embezzling and misappropriating funds. And then 3 murders, basically. So, anyways, so now they're going to court because the experiments, I forgot to mention this, the experiments that the Nazi Party wanted to be conducted would be to help the Nazi Party in some way or some way prove that the Aryan race was the superior race or that disabled people were less than human somehow. That's how these experiments were supposed to go. It was supposed to help justify the genocide that they were committing, basically. But that's not what the experiments were that Ilse and her husband were conducting. It was literally just whims. So the Nazi Party was not happy with them. So they were basically just torturing and killing prisoners to look at their tattoos and hoped that would be overlooked by the Nazi Party. And the tattoo part they didn't care about that. So they go to court and they're trying to prove that Ilse was behind the scenes pulling all the strings of the men in her life, but they don't have some solid proof. So the fact of the matter was she was being manipulative and she was running the show. And she didn't care what happened to the men in her life. That is a fact. But they couldn't prove that she actually had any involvement in the killings or anything. And eventually they just determined that her husband would be the responsible party because he is the man. And they were removed from their post at Buchenwald and replaced by a man named Hermann Pitster? I don't know how to say it. Anyways, they were thrown in jail awaiting their trial, and they wouldn't go to trial until 1944. So they spent about a year in jail, or just kidding, 2 years, because it was 1942 that they were charged, and they didn't go to trial until 1944. And the judge decided that no matter how manipulative Ilse was, Karl was responsible because he was the commander and ultimately decided how the funds were used and how the prisoners were killed. So Ilse's husband was sentenced to death and in 1945 was actually shot to death by firing squad. But Ilse was let go. She was set free because the judge suspended all charges against her. Can you believe it? She was not held accountable for any of her evil actions that she committed. Or so it seems. Our story's not over yet. Let's keep going. So Ilse showed zero remorse over her husband's death. She didn't even care. Like, she just went on like life was normal. And she thought that, she got away scot-free. She was able to go back to her normal life with her 3 children, went back to Germany. But in 1945, Germany would be invaded by the United States and would free concentration camps, specifically those being held at Buchenwald. Ilse probably didn't know that at this time, her life was about to radically change because, people are going to start being held accountable for what happened. So on the 8th of April, the camp actually sent out, so Buchenwald camp sent out an SOS to the American military saying that the SS was getting ready to annihilate them, but the military said, hold on, we're on our way, we're almost there. And on the 11th of April, 1945, Buchenwald camp was officially liberated. And there was actually a plan to blow up Buchenwald, like with dynamite, and kill all the people and cover up all their tracks and all the atrocities that had happened in the camp. But thankfully, when the call came in to ask for how many explosives do you need, a prisoner actually answered the phone and was like, "Oh, sorry, we don't need any explosives. We've already blown it up. It's been taken care of." And so the people were like, "Oh, okay, cool. We won't send you any then." It hadn't been blown up, but the Americans freed it. And when they did, the Americans invited the German people of Weimar, which is the city around Buchenwald, to come to the camp and see what had been going on right under their noses and what they had been supporting with the Nazi Party. They saw 80,000 people cramped into a space that was only meant for 8,000 people. They saw corpses laying around in front of the crematorium. Some women that were walking through even would pass out because of the sight of all the bodies. And the American soldiers were horrified when they discovered a collection of human body parts, including internal organs and some shrunken heads in display cases. And they even found several household items covered in human skin. So they had proof that this had been going on. And the Americans interviewed many of the prisoners of the camps and heard all the horrifying stories of what Ilse Koch had done. So her perfect world came crashing down pretty quick when she was arrested for her crimes against humanity. At her trial, she had the gall to claim that all of the objects that she had made covered in human skin were actually goat skin, not human skin. But the biggest problem with her claim was that most of the things had tattoos on them. So her story didn't match the stories that everyone else was telling. So there was a whole crew of Jewish prisoners who testified against her. They said that the whole time they were at the camp, it was their job to butcher human bodies and skin them in order to make things that Ilse requested. She had a ton of people actually testify against her, and there was plenty of proof that all of these things existed and that someone had ordered these objects to be made from human skin, but there was no proof that it was actually Ilse that had been the one to order this to be done. So they only had testimony from witnesses, and that was basically considered hearsay. So they couldn't use that as proof to convict her. So in 1947, she was in jail, and she actually became pregnant after an affair with another German inmate. And she gave birth in prison to her son. And this poor kid, his name was Ew, U-W-E, but you pronounce it Ew. Poor kid. So not only did he have an evil mother, but his name was Ew. Poor thing. So she was forced to give her son away after he was born. So he had a fighting chance at a normal life. So she never showed any form of remorse for her heinous behavior. In fact, if you watch the videos from her trial, she actually looks fairly annoyed and angry that she's having to even be there. Like it's some inconvenience in her life and she shouldn't even have to be there. Like she just looks annoyed. Now, General Lucas D. Clay, the United States military governor, believed that they actually didn't have enough evidence to prove that it was her that gave the orders to actually so they couldn't actually sentence her to death. So he was only able to sentence her to 4 years of hard labor. 4 years of hard labor. Are you kidding me? For what she did? That's it. So she served her sentence and was set free. Now, I'm sure you're feeling the same way I was when I was reading this information. I got very upset, but don't worry. Again, our story is not over yet. Once she was out of prison, she was immediately put on trial again for her crimes for a third time. And this time she was on trial by West Germany. So it wasn't the Americans putting her on trial. It was West Germany that was putting her on trial this time. So it was the German people. And this time she was actually given a life sentence. And there was one key witness that made this happen. His name was Dr. Morgan. And he actually testified at all 3 of Ilse's trials. And he said of Ilse, she was a hussy who rode horseback in sexy underwear in front of the prisoners and then noted down for punishment the numbers of those who looked at her. She lay around in her garden in front of prisoners, simply primitive. But she had nothing to do with the lampshade business, and she did not deserve such draconian punishment. She was a victim of a horror story. I don't believe him. I don't believe him at all. But I forgot to mention that this testimony was supposed to be defending Ilse's character. Defending it. And that was the best they could do to defend her character. Seriously. Like, she must have been a real terrible person if that is the best that they could do to say that, no, she is actually a good person. Yeah. And like I said, Ilse had 4 children in her life, 2 of which spent most of their time growing up in the camp. So her oldest son and her oldest daughter. And they didn't fully understand what was going on in the camp because they stayed in the home and didn't really go into the camp. So when her son grew up, so her oldest son, he found out that the world really hated his family and he didn't know why. So he actually ended up doing research on what his mother had done and ended up killing himself to try and escape the guilt and shame of what she had done. And then her daughters were able to get married and change their name and move on with their lives and wanted absolutely nothing to do with their mother because she was so horrendous in the things that she had done. Now, her other son that she had given away actually passed through foster care, never really had a family, and at 18, while working as an insurance salesman, he decided he wanted to know who his real parents were and found his birth certificate and saw the name of his mother. And soon, he found news articles about his mother and her trial and decided to go visit her to get her side of the story. Now, at this point in life, because she's got her life sentence, she didn't have hardly any visitors. No one wanted to come and see her. Because her oldest son was dead, her husband was dead, all her daughters wanted nothing to do with her. So she was ecstatic to see her youngest son. She told him everything that was said was a giant lie. He didn't fully believe her since she did help run a concentration camp. And he knew that there was no way she was fully innocent. But he started to really believe her when their relationship grew stronger and he really loved his mother. He would visit her once a month and she slowly convinced him that she must be innocent. And she wanted him to get a lawyer to try and get her to be set free. But there was absolutely no way that he would be able to do that. So in 1967, at the age of 61 years old, she realized that she was never going to get out of prison and that her final attempt to manipulate a man into getting what she wanted had failed. So she was going to be there forever. So she decided to hang herself in her prison cell by using the bed sheets that she had tied together. And in 1971, Ew told her version of the story to the New York Times. She claimed that the liberal American courts were the only ones who didn't give her a fair trial. Okay, I have issue with that because it was the Germans who committed her to life in prison. The Americans actually said there wasn't enough evidence. So I'm not sure why she had a beef with the Americans. Maybe it's because we were the first ones to call her out on all her heinous crimes, but I don't know what her beef was. It was the Germans that sentenced her. But no one believed any of her stories that Yu was telling of his mother, and most people actually felt bad for him for being manipulated by his own mother. So, in total, around 280,000 people passed through the gates of Buchenwald, including prisoners of war, political prisoners, Romanian people, Freemasons, Jews, Poles, mentally ill people, physically disabled people, ordinary criminals, and sexual deviants. Over 56,000 people died in this camp, and Ilse had a hand in that because she got pleasure from watching these people die. Because of her perverted, sadistic, and cruel ways of torture, not to mention the fact that she was a psychopath who enjoyed the suffering and pain of others and got immense pleasure from it, Ilse Koch is a horrible human in history for the week. And I honestly don't think the way that she died was justice for what she had done. I always feel that way. Like, there have been many women that we've talked about, or even men. I'll include men on that. Then I'm just like, you know what? This wasn't fair. The way that they were able to, she escaped basically justice because she killed herself. Like, it just makes me angry that these people don't face justice, but they will. Oh, they will. Anyways, so Ilse Koch, our horrible human in history. Tell me what you think. Do you think she's worse than some of the other ladies that we've talked about? She's a pretty horrible Nazi, and I'm sure a lot of you haven't heard about it because she was one of the only women charged for these crimes against humanity. I think she was the only woman charged in the concentration crimes against humanity. Like, crazy. So next week, we're actually going to talk about someone that I had no clue existed, but is known for basically creating the Auschwitz of Africa. His name is Francisco Macias Nugama. He considered himself to be a Hitlerian Marxist, so basically combining two of the most destructive ideologies to ever exist. And that should give you an idea of where this story is going to go. So join me next week as we dive into Francisco Marcia Nugama's story of destruction and what made him such a horrible human in history. Be sure you're liking, subscribing, and sharing this podcast with anybody that you know that would love these stories about history and horrible, awful people. And I will see you guys next week.